On this day, the 4th of November, 1918, the Armistice of Padua was signed between the forces of Italy and the forces of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This ended the conflict for Austria and took it out of the war. As we know, Germany was to surrender a week later. So this was a catastrophic week for Germany. It was also probably, well, it had become obvious many years before, just what a drag Austria had been for Germany. Just as Italy in the Second World War was to drag them down into fighting in the deserts of North Africa and the Balkans, so Austria's participation in the war involved Germany in Serbia, Greece, and the Italian front. Austria's war had been a disaster from the get-go. When they had declared war on Serbia and attempted to invade it, they failed. They were thrown back. Little Serbia, with its 1 or 2 million people, threw back an empire of almost 60 million. The Russians occupied Austrian Poland. The Germans had to bail them out of that. Then the Italians declared war on them, and they opened up a new front, completely surrounding Austria by hostile states or war zones, except for the border with Germany and the tiny little one they have with Switzerland. Then in 1916, Romania declared war. Again, the Germans had to come and bail them out and invade it for them. Then they were fighting down in Serbia, fighting the British and the French and the Greeks and the Serbs. It was a total and utter mess. So, the truce was signed on the 3rd of November, yesterday, but only came into effect today. However, the Austrians had already stopped fighting. The men were exhausted, and they would not even fight anymore. The generals in charge knew this, and they knew they had to get a peace. So, on the 28th, they had begun to negotiate a truce. The Italians, whilst this negotiation was going on, had started the occupation of South Tyrol and parts of what are now northwest Italy. They had landed in Trieste and taken that city. They took the city of Trent and Udine, I think that's how to pronounce it. The Austrians didn't want to sign the peace because it was a victor's peace. But if they didn't, they would lose everything. So let's have a look at what happened afterwards. So Austria was required to evacuate their forces from all territory occupied since 1914, okay? But also much of their own territory, such as South Tyrol, which half of it is German-speaking. Various parts of what is now northwest Italy, Trieste, Istria on the sea there, part of Croatia now, the Dalmatian coast, Adriatic. So they were having to evacuate from quite a lot of areas. At this point, the whole empire was in collapse. Already, the Czechs had declared independence. The Hungarians had separated themselves from Austria. They had dissolved the union. And the Poles had already declared independence, looking to reunite with Poland. And Poland, the day before, so yesterday, November the 3rd, 1918, had already declared its independence and reunited with the provinces in Galicia and parts of what is now Russia. So everything was on the move at this point, and Germany was falling back on the Western Front, it was a catastrophe. So a part of the peace deal was they had to evacuate areas that weren't even Italian. Some areas were German speaking. Now, this was Italy's aim, was to pretty much destroy Austria at this point. The Americans, again on the 3rd, had rejected the Austrian attempt to appeal to the Americans. The Austrians had already said, we know we're going to lose Austrian Poland. They were accepting that. They understood that they would lose some land to Romania and probably to Serbia as well. So what they were trying to do was create a federal empire. But the American Secretary of State, Lansing, dismissed it and said he was for the cause of the Czechs, the Slovaks and the South Slavs, thereby pretty much ending the Austrian Empire, an empire that had been in some way around for almost a millennia. This ended up creating a massive power vacuum in Central Europe, one in which ethnic groups, cultural groups, different races of people were living next to each other, living in little pockets here and there. There was no firm border between languages or ethnicities in this part of the world. I read once that the dissolution of the Austrian Empire created half a dozen little Austrian empires, because none of them were ethnically homogeneous, except possibly for Hungary, because they put their borders back so far that it only included ethnic Hungarians, but it left many ethnic Hungarians in what is now Slovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, and would create the climate for a resurgent Hungary to ally itself with Germany later on to take back what they believed was their land. Now, I think the better policy would have been to keep Austria, give Austrian Poland to Poland, fair enough, give a little bit of land to Romania, that was all ethnic Romanian, give Bosnia to Serbia, and maybe the Dalmatian coast and Istria and the Italian part of South Tyrol to Italy. But keep Austria as a federalized empire, keep it stable, because with that you don't create this big sucking wound in the middle of Europe, which then creates more wars, more ethnic bloodshed, chaos, and it also would have been powerful enough that a certain Mr. Adolf wouldn't have been able to just walk in and annex the whole thing 20 years later. That's just me. Anyway, so the Armistice of Padua is signed yesterday and goes into force today. This effectively ends the war in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, and also seals the fate of the 1,000-year-old Habsburg monarchy and the empire which it ruled over. If you like these videos, come back tomorrow and like, comment and subscribe.